then I went down to Mexico and I tried out hostels, which was super intimidating. I was so scared. And I just realized in that experience, like, because I remember people like, what are you doing? Where are you going? And then jumping into that world, so many people do it.
This episode is sponsored by Southern Utah Safe and Vault. It's one-stop shop, buy, education, delivery, everything you need with the safe or a vault door. Website is safesfirst.com. Their showroom is 1397 West, Sunset Boulevard, number 115 in St. George, Utah. Phone number is 435-767-7878. Hey guys, welcome back to the Derick Leg Podcast. We are in the vault today. Again, 52 episodes straight. We've been here every week, so it's been an accomplishment for Blue Form and I with Mallory and Blake, so it's kind of cool. I don't know if we can celebrate a year yet or if we have to celebrate a year next week, so we'll figure that out. Today, we've got a local, born and raised Dixian.
Oh boy.
Is that what you call it?
I guess so. I don't know if we're allowed to say that now.
Yeah, we are. We are on this. This is Jennifer Shakespeare. How's it going?
Good to meet you. Yeah, it's good.
Good.
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm glad. This will be fun. I know that we had met today, so I try to. People think that it's like all my friends that come on here, and we're friends now.
Yeah.
But like, I've had people on here I've heard of, but I didn't meet until we were like in the room together. So it's kind of fun for me just to like expand the network and expand people I know. And that's kind of half the reason I did the podcast. So
well, this is amazing to see your setup. So it's a great first introduction. Absolutely.
Oh, good.
A little intimidating.
I'm glad I could impress you. So we're going to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your background. Like I said, born and raised here, families owned businesses. I think your siblings own businesses as well. It's a popular last name. And we'll kind of go from there, but then we'll get into some of the travel and tourism that you're currently doing with your employment now.
Perfect.
So give me like a small background, not too long, just kind of from here, this many siblings, I do this for fun, that kind of thing.
So if anybody is watching from here, they know either me or somebody in my family because there's a bunch of us.
Yeah.
So I always joke, like, if somebody's up north, they're like, oh, I haven't heard any Shakespeares. I'm like, you need to just come to Southern Utah because we're everywhere.
You'll bump into one.
Yeah, either with an E or an out an E. We're somewhere around. But I'm the youngest of 9 kids, Tom and Gloria. My mom was raised in Panguitch and then came down here, and my dad, Tom, was from here. So I've mostly been here. Yeah, I left to Arizona right after high school and then came back, and then I've been to New York, and I did a little stint in California, but always ended up opportunities brought me back here. And
You lived in New York?
for a mission.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, upstate New York, Rochester.
Oh, cool.
So it was a good little introduction of snow.
Like I kind of want to go to New York, but they're kind of crazy out there. But I think like New York, the city,
The
New
city
York.
is really cool too. Yeah, there's some amazing stuff to like tourist-wise go check out. Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was into baseball. Sorry, I'm totally jacking
No,
your
this is
introduction
good.
right here.
I'm like, this is about me. No.
Yeah, this is my time, Derick.
Yeah.
I was into baseball as a kid, and like my name's Derick, and Derek Jeter was like the shortstop for the Yankees. And so I was like, oh yeah, that's my guy, right? Because we have the same name, even though it's spelled different. And so I was a big Yankees fan growing up, and I've kind of turned into, I don't travel a lot, but I've wanted to go see like parks or venues, like sports venues.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how my wife gets me places. She's like, I got to go to Chicago for a work thing. Maybe do you want to go see a Cubs game and check out Wrigley Field?
They have really cool stadiums. Yeah. Like even in New York, their stadium's really rad.
Yeah, so that's kind of Madison
you
Square
have
Garden.
not made it to there?
I've not been to New
Okay.
York, but I was a little jealous when you said you'd been there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're
Resume.
good. I was in upstate New York, which was still beautiful, way different though. And then I've lived in Salt Lake, but anyway, your poor guests are so bored right now. But yeah, from here, and then I did a travel abroad and then came back during COVID and just have loved this area, and it's just amazing opportunities that just kind of keep me around.
You a lifer? You can stay here for life?
You know, I'll want to end up here at some point, but the goal is I want to live a year internationally somewhere.
Okay.
That would be the dream. So maybe
That's
at some point. If I'm here for life, then just find me someday and be like, you are not following your dream.
You said.
Yeah. But it's awesome. All my of the 9 siblings, 7 of us are here.
Wow.
And so every other week we get together for Shakespeare Sunday. And
That's cool.
yeah. My siblings, they all have different businesses, pest control between real estate and also plumbing business. They just bought my dad's business, Bahama Bucks.
Okay.
They have that too. So a whole variety, very impressive. They definitely, as the youngest kid, they've set up a really big shoes to fill.
So it's a big shadow for sure.
Yeah, but also it's great to like be kind of follow in the wake. They've done some really cool stuff.
That's awesome. One thing Mallory had brought up, and I think she said it was her sister that had mentioned this. Is that right, Mal? About growing up in an entrepreneurial family?
Yeah, she was like, I kind of want to know about it. And I
Yeah.
was like, hey, I'll throw it out. So
Yeah. No, I'd love to hear your input on that because I've thought about that with my own son. So I have a son, he's 18 months. So he's very new and I way overthink everything, right? But like my wife did the traditional go to school, get a degree, your 9 to 5 thing. And I didn't. I mean, I went and kind of tried to build my own thing and go that route. So I think it'll be cool that he'll kind of have both sides of that. So I want to hear your experience growing up with your dad having his own business and a successful business that's still going right today with your siblings.
Yeah. So growing up, my dad was a plumber, and definitely not until high school was it even like profitable. It seemed like I was the tail end to where I remember like we had the huge gallons of like flour and potatoes and like impressively they took us to Disneyland every year, but like it was a pretty tight, like having 9 kids. I don't know how they did it, but super impressive. My dad's like the hardest worker I know. That's the one thing. Like he was out of town all the time with jobs and working, and then he'd come home and like doing scouts and church. So always like the rules in the family, you couldn't live there unless you were working. Like once you were 16, you worked, and that was the deal. I have strong memories growing up of my brothers because they all worked with my dad, and so they'd be up by like 5 a.m. And of course, as a 16-year-old, they're not waking up that early.
Sure.
So I'd wake up to my dad, like yelling at him to try to get him out of bed and like firing him and then hiring him. And so that was the kind of growing up of just like work and like high work ethic was a big deal for us. I actually growing up, I never wanted to own my own business, like just seeing how much it took. Because even my grandma, going back even further, my grandma, she owned her sobriety store. So just even from that generation of just the impressive woman that she was and like how much that took and how my uncles and they ran the stores as well. Like it's always been kind of this consistency of like you own your own business. But for me, I'm like, I'd rather just work for somebody because I don't want to deal with all that extra.
Yeah.
But definitely I think now I found in sales, I mean, it's kind of like running your own business. And that I've realized how high of a work ethic I have when I'm in certain situations. And I'm like, no, we just do everything we need to do to get the job done. Like, what are you guys doing leaving?
Yeah.
The work's not done yet.
Yeah. I'll be done when I'm finished.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not always the greatest at what I do, but I know that for me, like, you can always count that I'll work to get the job done.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean,
definitely come from that.
My dad was a 9 to 5, but he he worked UPS for pretty much most of my life, and he instilled that in us too with the work ethic. But we did a lot of like landscaping type things is what I did growing up. And so yeah, like you're talking about your dad waking up your brothers, our thing was, so we lived in dad was upstairs, all the kids were downstairs, or the boys were downstairs, and my dad would have like his electric razor, and you would hear him like walk out of his room, come down the stairs, and you'd be like, oh, here we go.
There's the alarm.
Yeah,
It's
whether
the
it was like
crazy.
church or going to work outside. So I was having flashes of that when you were talking about dad going to wake up the brothers.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like, and you remember the alarm clock that had like that screeching noise?
Oh yeah, it's awful.
It never woke them up. I would always wake me up in the other room and I'd have to go shake them and be like, oh my gosh, please just wake up and stop that noise. In summertime, I'd help out, like go clean job sites and like pick up the trash. But it was always, and it was funny, like being a plumber's daughter, like I remember a school project I brought like PVC pipe as part of it. So it's in some form or fashion, I always like made it through my life. But yeah, on the physical labor end, like that type of work was a big deal. And even seeing my brothers now, like how they've run their businesses, and on the free thinking side of it, it definitely is encouraging because I was such a school advocate. Like I went to Dixie, did student government, was all in, absolutely loved it. It's a fantastic school. It wasn't until, and I loved SUU, I went there as well. But at SUU, I was like, oh, school's a business. Like, this is definitely, like, education, of course, is a big deal, but, like, they're making money off of this as well. So I'm kind of an advocate both ways. I'm like, if you can do it as a trade, absolutely, but just be talented in whatever form or fashion. It doesn't need to be education necessarily, like seeing what my brothers and family has done with business. Education's only been a fraction to that, and it's just what you do personally to drive forward. You know?
Sure.
And there's so much education now electronically. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much you can learn if you just apply and are curious.
Well, that's what we were talking when we were getting on here with Mallory being Alexa. It's like, like, what can you not learn online that you can be taught in a school?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I will say this, because I'm pretty hard on going to college here, unless you have a straight line and you need to go take these classes and do these things and get that degree to have that job. Totally understand that. But I will say that if I could go back and do it again, I think I would have at least went and taken some business classes, some accounting classes, things like that I lack in now.
I wish those were mandatory for everyone, because I wish I had those classes too.
Well, I mean, probably should have taken most of that stuff in high school.
Yeah,
but,
that would have helped.
Yeah.
How do I do my taxes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some of those basic things that luckily I had my brother Adam to kind of walk me through a lot of that stuff. And I saw mistakes that my 3 older brothers had made that kind of helped me navigate some of that. But yeah, I think if I go back and I don't even need a degree, but I'd just go take a couple classes on just to better myself and my own business, for things that I lack.
Well, I feel like as an adult too, like I've been out of school 10 years now, and I just recently signed up for like some sales training and courses that'll be next month, just because it hit me where I'm like, I'm coasting. I'm officially to a point where I really need to learn more. And I think in the traditional sense of education, it's like I've got my degree and then life teaches you the rest. But there's also throughout, like, it's so nice to have courses and seminars and trainings that can just help sharpen the tools, right? And that's what it kind of hit me. I'm like, I've been out 10 years, but I need to go back in and just maybe take a 2-day course on this or that. Like, and for me, I like being in person. So that's been like, the internet's so wonderful, but I'm like, okay, can someone just teach me this? That would be great.
Yeah. My in-laws are lifelong learners, I guess you'd put it. Like my father-in-law now, like he still will go take a course here and there. Like he did a fishing course. He's done a welding course. He did a welding course, not through the college, but he was just taking other courses. Like one was at the community center, I think, and he just went and learned how to do something. My oldest brother-in-law, like I think just recently he stopped taking classes and he's quite a bit, he's probably 10 years older than us. And so anyway, I've never viewed it that way. Like I've said on here before, my dad had 2 degrees and he delivered packages, he was a truck driver and delivered packages. So I never really saw the benefit of it when I was a kid. And I see it now, but back then I just never understood why anyone would pay that kind of money to go to get a degree when you can make more money doing something else. Oh,
and rarely do you see somebody in the degree that they're actually in. Like, I guess for me, communications was such a broad skill. So in sales, it could make sense. But unless you're like medical, then definitely it's always. But I think the social realm, going to school on that extra aspect, I was talking to someone in my family, of like a niece or nephew that was going, and I'm like, man, just on the social aspect, it's such like a special environment to add in that you don't ever get it as an adult still. Like there's just like a college realm to that. That's so fun. But. Well,
and Eric Gubler, and we had talked when he was on, we talked about homeschooling because he was homeschooled. And
didn't he do sports though?
Maybe when he was younger, he was homeschooled. But he was homeschooled. I guess I don't know at what point, but and I've thought about that, like now how the school systems are. I'm like, gosh, like if it keeps on going at the rate that it's going when Will's 6, or 5 or 6, I may just figure out how to homeschool him.
Yeah. And I think homeschooling in the sense of like with school, that there's such a good blend of, like, I remember growing up, people that were homeschooled, like, oh, they're kind of
the weird ones. Sure.
But it seems like now that between like being able to do sports or like even the community theater connection, like that you can still blend in an amazing social environment that they get a stellar education and can still be social too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't have any kids, so I don't know that.
Well, I'm brand
that worry
new
and
to this,
stress.
so
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about either. It's just random thoughts I have when I can't sleep. Yeah. So let's go through a little bit of what you're doing now with work.
Yeah.
So, well, you know what? Let's back up a little bit because I want to
Okay.
talk about when you were abroad
Yeah.
and COVID hit.
Yes.
So tell me what you were doing, what your plan was, and then how you reacted to it when COVID kind of
Yeah.
canceled your plan.
So I'll back up one step even
'Kay,
further because
sure.
I went to in school realm. I was like, I'm going to be a journalist. This will be so fantastic. I added marketing and then absolutely love that. I ended up in assisted living and doing sales and doing management. And when I first started in sales, I had this like goal of becoming an administrator of one of the buildings. I'm like, that's where I want to get to. That looks so amazing. So fast forward to 8 years later, I'm back. It was at the Meadows here in town. And that was the building I wanted to run. And I had incredible mentors that helped guide me through the way. Terrell Clove here in town was influential to my whole life in assisted living. But I was at that community running, it was, gosh, how many, between memory care and assisted living, it was like 180 apartments.
Yeah, it's a big
Yeah,
facility.
big place, amazing team. But it just hit me at this point where I'm like, at that point I was, 32? I'm like, I'm 32, single, no kids, and I'm working where I'm one day going to live. Like, whether it's this building or, but like an assisted
Sure.
living. And I'm like, I'm acting like I'm taking care of a family, and I'm not. Like, I need to go and do something. So I actually, what was his quote? How Ryan Mickler, is it Mickler? Is that his last name? He does a podcast too, but Order of Men.
Oh, yeah.
Order of Man. But he had posted just within that time too of when he was relocating his family, of just like, it just really resonated with me. And now, of course, I'm like, Mallory, can you look up my Instagram because I have it posted there. But it just hit me where I'm like, I need to do this. Like, I'm going to regret this if I don't. And so I gave my notice at the dream job that I'd worked towards. It's always those feelings like you get to the spot that you'd worked so hard to be in, then you're like, oh, this is it?
Yeah, I mean, and you did that when you were 32. Like,
Yeah.
you were at your dream spot at 32.
Well, and I'd worked for it, and all of a sudden I was like, I don't think this is my dream.
Yeah, right.
Like, yeah, and I realized I'd been 8 years into it, so I'm like, I'm at a steady point that if I need to come back, I can come back. But it was a huge fear for me, like, especially like in business and growing up in a family where it's like, this is what you do, and this is. I realized how much of my identity was wrapped around work and like what it made me. But I didn't want it to be everything. So I gave my notice, and like my last day at that community, I was a ball baby. Like, it was really sad because it's the people you love, it's your community. Like, it's not just work. But I took that leap, and it was incredible. I road tripped up to, initially I everything I wanted to do and planned to do, it was all based around like, how long can I make my money last? So I road tripped up to Canada and BC area, and I car camped the entire way. Like, it was beautiful. I was like, okay, nobody told me how gorgeous our neighbor is. Canada's phenomenal. Highlight there, I did Whistler mountain biking. The thing that's funny now, looking back, I had a hardtail, and like I'm like sitting in line, and
Explain what that is for people that aren't married to a wife like mine, because I wouldn't have known
so
what that was.
Whistler is a giant mountain biking park, and it's like the cream of the crop, the most amazing place to go. You pull up, and it's like these huge jumps and like the lifts that take you up, and like the most amazing tracks to ride down. Thinking I was saving money, I packed my electric bike and my mountain bike the entire way. The electric bike was great, but the mountain bike, it was a hardtail. And I'm like sitting in line. I was already so freaking nervous, so I'd taken like a shot of vodka and a caffeine pill because I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm here, but I'm super intimidated. And I'm in line. I'm looking around, and people are like, oh, how do you like your bike? I'm like, it's the only thing I know. Like, it's great, but
Compared to what?
Compared to what? Yeah, compared to all their like full suspension.
Right.
And everyone had the full helmets. I had my biker helmet on. I had like booty shorts and a t-shirt. Everyone had like the knee pads, shoulder pads, and I'm like, one thing is not like the other here. Like, I think I'm missing a memo. But it was phenomenal and so great. But 2 days later, when I'm in Glacier National Park camping, I like wiggle my shin around, and I'm like, it sounded like a floorboard. I had gotten the worst shin splint ever from riding the hardtail the whole day. I think it actually 2 days. So by the second day, like I was just like totally hammered. My body was like, that was the whole reason you need a full suspension bike. So yeah, by the end of that trip, like I like hobbled back into St. George because I wrapped around, came back for a friend's birthday party, but I was like broken from that one. But in my trip, then I went down to Mexico and I tried out hostels, which was super intimidating. I was so scared. And I just realized in that experience, like, because I remember people like, what are you doing? Where are you going? And then jumping into that world, so many people do it. Like it, for me, like it's fun to talk about, but I'm like, it's really like, it's not that uncommon. It seemed like I met so many people that traveled alone, and like hostels were such a great introduction to like meet the most fascinating people. And then you kind of have an idea of what you're going to do. And then you jump in there and find out all this extra stuff that everyone else is doing and jump on board. And so I traveled through Mexico. I did Guatemala. And then my dream was I wanted to hit Nepal, and wanted to do the Camino walk in Spain. So I went over I did some extra stuff in between, but just for time's sake, I realized, sorry, listeners. But
no, I think it's fascinating.
I did Vietnam, and that one was really fun. Like I rode my bike. I rented a motorcycle and then just rode all the way up the country. And COVID had just hit right before then. Like I came back. I'd always hub back to St. George, like repack my backpack and like get maybe a few other things that changed. And so at that point, I remember needing to masks were an option, and someone had brought up like, are you sure you should be going over this time? It was January. I'm like, it's gonna be fine. Like I've always lived with the thought where I'm like, the world is much better than we perceive it. So in my personal, I'm like, it's gonna be fine, there's no big deal. I remember, I think I was like one of the few people not wearing a mask flying over to Vietnam, and I'm like, oh, it's just a cultural thing, like this isn't for any COVID thing. And by the end of Vietnam, like it started getting pretty spooky because I'd be one of maybe 2 or 3 people in these large like destinations that are supposed to be so crowded. And at first it was cool. I'm like, oh, there's like no crowds here. This is wonderful. And by the end, I'm like, this feels like an apocalypse.
Yeah. Is there a reason nobody's here?
Yeah. And I saw some hostels that were totally locked down because somebody like had COVID, and so they were like keeping it quarantined. And for the last 2 weeks of me there, each spot I went to, I'd have government officials showing up. I'd have to walk them through my entire like route because they were trying to track down anybody that was on a plane or a boat that had an infection. And so by my last day, I was going to extend maybe a couple more days, and they're like, no, everywhere's closed. Like you've got to leave. I'm like, oh, okay. So I went over to Thailand, and they were probably like a month behind what was already happening. So it felt kind of normal, but schools and bars had just shut down. I'm like, okay, this seems kind of familiar.
Yeah.
And I had family at home that was like, you should come back. Like things are starting to get crazy and spooky. And I'm like, it's fine. I'm not ending my trip. I quit my job. Like this is what I want to go to Nepal, and I want to go to Spain and then find a place to live. Like this is my plan. My regret is because then the states came out with a level 4 warning, like come back. So I'm like, oh, okay,
yeah,
I think this might be serious. I had like 3 weeks left on my visa, and I remember calling my sister being like, I could go down to the beach area of Thailand and like check that out like right before I come home. She's like, or you could get stuck there and they're going to shut everything down. Like you'll see the beaches later, get back. And so I wish I would have stayed because I flew back in and it was the easiest thing ever. I'm like, this was so dumb. Why did I come back? But I mean, at that point, I'm wondering what to do because I'm like, well, I technically had 6 more months and I was going to end up in Europe like and find a home for a year. What do I do now? Thankfully, my old boss had reached out and was like, I heard you're back. Like, come work with us. Come do assisted living again. And I'm like, well, I know how to do it. But my agreement to him, I said, I know I'm not going to stay. So I don't want, again, the work ethic, I'm like, I don't want you guys to have any expectation. I'll give you a year. I tried to do 6 months. He's like, I need a year. I'm like, okay, I'll give you a year, but then I'm going to get back on the road. I've got extra dreams to do. So assisted living during COVID time, like it was, so, because I didn't work at one community, we oversaw, like, what was it? At that point, Utah, Nevada, and California were the regions I was in. But it was horrible. Like, it was so sad to see. Like, I remember we did, like, resident parades trying to we'd walk around all their windows and, like, cheer them up. But they're all in their apartments between all their meals and between activities. They're just one-on-one. And I mean, I got it as a company, like, you want to keep them safe. I remember there were certain buildings that we had COVID in them, and like, I'd always just go there to help out and be with the CNAs. Like, I did more than sales. Like, it was whatever you needed to help it out. And there were moments,
ethic.
yeah, well, work ethic, and also like they're the people that you love and want to take care of.
Sure.
So on the scare, like, COVID for everybody was a freaky time where there's moments where you're extreme and you're worried about everything, and other times you're like, oh my gosh, can we just all calm down?
That's pretty much what I was the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got like, there are certain people I talk to that I'm like, yeah, in your normal world, like, this isn't a big deal. But I'm like, if I get COVID, I shut down a building. Like,
Sure.
so it was just, it depends on where you're at and what was the influence.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I'm like, and I see people who never get to leave their room. You get to go outside and walk in the park. Like, they get to touch their family from a window.
Yeah.
Like, they have grandkids they haven't even seen for a year. Like, it was just such an interesting time. But my year came up, and I knew I was, like, at that point, what happened? There was something that was it was the second wave that was kind of showing up a little bit. And I'm like, I don't think I can go travel like I want to still. Like, I don't want to be restricted in what my dreams are. So I'm going to go do that. But a year's up, and I can't stay here, but I can't go there. What am I going to do? Matt Casperson, actually from Pine View, you know him, he reached out to me, and there was a job with Deseret Digital Media. It was a senior website, but it was like the perfect, I feel like my life has always been like these amazing happen chance opportunities that, like, in some ways I've criticized myself thinking, man, am I even like planning out my life, or where am I going? But it's just always these amazing windows and doors that I get to go to that give me the most incredible experiences. And this was one of them. When he first called me, I'm like, yeah, that product seems so, I'm not sure. And he just raved about the company and kept calling me to apply. And it was amazing. Like, it was the Deseret Digital Media. It was like this perfect for me. I'm like, if I'm going to stay, I want to find a different company completely and have like a culture experience. And what does that business look like, and how do they treat people? And at least it was something in a world I knew, like senior living, but now as a website. Fast forward then, that was June of last year. And I got a call from my boss that fall. Where he's like, we're selling the business. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, what about me?
Yeah, so
what does that mean? And I was, honestly, I would have been fine either way. Like, there was this moment where I'm like, well, maybe this is my travel window. Like, this was the perfect introduction, but now I'm going to go travel. And he's like, we're moving you to Utah.com. I'm like, what's that?
Yeah.
I don't
cool.
know what that is.
What do I do? Well, so let me interject right here. So have you always been that way, where you've kind of, the reason I bring this up is most people would be negative about that, but you look at it as what's the next opportunity. So have you kind of always been that way, or is there something in your life, like a parent or a grandparent or someone that steered you that way? Because that's not
like
normal.
open to opportunity, or
But just thinking positive about different things. Like you were saying, there's always a window that opens up, door that opens up. People don't look at things that way. That's not normal.
I think I'm a naturally positive person.
Yeah.
I like to be on the happy side of things. For me, my mom has always instilled in us like extreme ownership, which I've recently listened to that book, and I'm like, oh yeah, this was my childhood upbringing.
It's right behind you.
Is it really? Yeah. That was my upbringing. Like, it's like, there's no excuses. It's up to you. So I think that then I took a lot more accountability on myself, but then in the world of like positivity, like that's just kind of my natural beat. So it's kind of blended really well together. Like, there's definitely been, like, I remember there was a job, like, it was amazing because the company I worked for, they like pretty much demoted me at one point, like, but they didn't fire me. And I was like, they put me back in a community, and I'm like, why am I here? Like, they should have just fired me. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And then so it's not like I just naturally like beat to the next thing.
Yeah.
But as I like was talking to some friends and really looking, I'm like, no, this actually works out incredibly better. And like, it usually takes like 6 months within that window of me like, oh, those connections, like, it's amazing. That's why I think Life Path is so cool, because like, there was a part of me that was really sad I wasn't out traveling and thought I wasn't following my dream. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm selling out. I'm back in St. George. Like, what am I doing? Like, I didn't have the courage to go and finish it out. But then Utah.com came into my life, and I talk like a person, but like For me, it's been like this roller coaster journey, but as I've really dug into it more, like it was exactly what it was meant to be. Like I now have a job that I can travel and do the most amazing like tourist adventure. Like I'm out canyoneering with my clients and we're off-roading, and the company I work for now, like I can work remotely. I could go travel and do the dreams that I want to do. But now I'm passionate in a whole other way that it's like, one, it's reawoken me and I feel like I'm home. Like not St. George home, but that's been kind of my cool set now, is like that call of moving me over like was kind of the bridge between the Jen that, don't get me wrong, there's going to be a day that I will live overseas, but I can still go do Nepal. I can still go do that walk, but then I get to come back and be passionate in a whole other way now that's been reawakening. Like I think that's when I started the journey back in 2019 to travel. Like I was looking for an kind of like that when you like your soul, like if it's you're looking for that calling, and I had that in assisted living, and there just came a point where I'm like, this is no longer it, which is amazing how that works. You can be in something and that can be it, and then it just stops.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of been a consistency for me too. Like religiously, that was an experience I had back in like 25, like something I was so passionate and for stopped resonating, and then you just try to find something new that works. And I don't know, that's life, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. It's interesting how those things happen where you think that you're at the finish line or this is what you've worked so hard to. And then I don't know if it's like you just evolve. Like, I don't know what the right word of it is, what the right word is. But I've been there too. Like I've had businesses where I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And then, well, like my holster business, I've brought it up on here a few times. We do custom holsters. I've done it for, gosh, we got to be like 9 or 10 years now. And I just don't have the love for it anymore. Like I'm even like trying to just find people that I can bring in so they can build the holsters, because I don't even want to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought like, man, this is it. This is something I can control. It's my own time. It's my own thing. I built it from my basement up to what it is now. But it seems like, I don't know if it's like you reach the top of that and then people like us, we just have that, want to do more, and then our mind just evolves to push us into something else. I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm kind of just thinking on the fly
totally.
here.
I think there's an element to it, at least how I've identified it so far into my 30s, is you go through life where it's like very obvious things that we need to do, and then all of a sudden you get to a point where it's just a blank canvas. And I think there's this cultural setting that we think that we are supposed to then choose that thing, and then that's the thing forever, where it's just for the time that it's meant to be a teaching moment, or like that passion for, like, it's interesting all of a sudden, like what can be so important in your life all of a sudden later on is just a phase in your life.
It's just a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom calls it the seasons.
Yeah.
Like it's just a season for that.
Yeah. I like that.
I've had opportunities where I'm like, man, I think this is what I need to do. But like, I think this is laid out for me to do this, but I don't feel like it's the right time. And I've had these conversations with my mom, and that's what she'll bring up. She's like, it's just not the season. Yeah.
And I had a friend, because I was being pretty critical to myself recently, and my friend was like, you know what? She's like, everything that you've done, like, it's always been, like, she even helped remind me, she's like, it's this betterment to this next thing. I'm like, oh yeah, like I need to remember that, because when we get hard on ourselves, I love that it's in seasons. Like it's like, because you think about seasons, like there's the winter time, like our winter moments, and then you come into spring and summer, and like
right.
That is a really true reflection to life as well. But I think now in my blend, because in the work ethic, like I know I can get so head in the sand into whatever my project is, like all things around me, like lose their importance until I accomplish what I need to.
We're similar in a lot of ways.
It's an amazing thing, and it can work out great, but then it's detrimental in so many other ways. So I'm really leaning into just trying to, like, on the personal end, like what does that look like? And even my habits, and like and when you talk seasons, I have cycles of like, oh, it seems like every spring I kind of like detach from a lot of stuff, ready to like jump into this new thing. And it's been really fun now, like I recently did ketamine as a infusion therapy. And it's been life-changing for me.
Really?
Yeah. Like I think I bring that up just more if there's listeners out there. Like for me, I'm not I wouldn't say I'm a depressed person or like that I struggle with that long term, but I recognized recently like there's been like certain bouts even in adulthood that you just need like a bridge to get you over to the next thing. And especially for me, because I got so into work and I got so into this one thing, I ignored everything else. And I know for me personally, I'm really bad at asking myself questions because I just follow into what naturally happens, it seems, which has worked out well. But it's good to sit and talk with yourself, right? And really
Kind of
ask,
check in.
why do you want to accomplish that thing? Is it for me, looking back on wanting to be an administrator in a building, like it just sounded so cool, right? But like, what else does that mean in my life, and what does that look like? So anyway, I found myself this spring where I was like, man, I'm not in a good spot, and I just happened to hear about ketamine for certain things, and like between anxiety and depression, and then also just that it was a life momentum forward. I'm like, that sounds awesome. I would love to try that. And
So is it just like an IV? Is that how they administer it?
Yeah. So they put in, it's honestly, the experience itself is so intense. Like if you've ever watched the movie Inception, it is like Inception. Like, so they put you up, not them setting you up at all. So they give you the IV, and they have somebody in the room with you. It's completely legal. So if people are wondering what the heck, like it's been fast because they used it a lot in Vietnam. Like it was a really helpful tool for the soldiers back then. And it's like, it's anesthesiologist. It's a thing that they use in anesthetics as well. But
Okay.
my experience, they set you up and then they just start the treatment, and they'll check in a little bit, like make sure everything's okay. And I remember at one point with the first time I went through, I'm like, are you with me, or am I here with you? Like, because you're just like fall into these, it's very psychedelic in a way, like you close your eyes and you're just going into wherever your mind takes you. I ended that first session, and I remember asking them, saying, I feel worse. Like how is this supposed to help? Like, this wasn't great. And they're like, just give it time. So you do 2 treatments the first week, and then you can push that. I think with my next one was 2 weeks later. But by that weekend, like it just, there's all these like lingering tasks that I never take, which of course was like, I got so much stuff done. But it just showed me emotionally where like I just reconnected back to life, but also in a way that wasn't just like to accomplish things. Like it's been like this amazing, beautiful like connection. And it's made me more intentional, like just of where I spend my time. And like, that's kind of the journey I'm on now, is like, I don't have an answer for it, but I just know like of where I want to put my time and what efforts, even if when I'm alone, like what am I doing, or who am I with? Like I've just become more thoughtful into what that means for me. But yeah, ketamine, as far as like emotionally, the balancing of it and just the connection to life, it was an amazing experience.
See, the only time I'd ever heard about ketamine was like severe depression, suicidal thoughts, those type of things. I didn't know there was a treatment for anything else.
Yeah, I had a friend, when he was telling me, he's like, he was actually the one that was telling me his guest didn't. He's like, you don't need it. Like, that's not a thing. And I'm like, well, you have no idea. Like, one. And that's probably for people in that realm where it's like, it's not the traditional, like, oh yeah, they clearly need it. And absolutely for them, I'm the woman that was my first, like assisted me through it. For her husband, she told me his story of like, he was severely depressed and like this was their last resort.
Yeah.
And just how influential that was for him. So yeah, in that setting, like amazing tool that is something to be looked at. But for like the gray area people that usually get ignored, of like that suffer for far too long in this gray section of like, you have your highs, you have your lows, and you just think it's a season. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool in that setting too. So I think that's made me a little bit more of an advocate of like, hey, you don't have to be this categorical, like, oh, they're depressed, so you should go do it. It's like, hey, you're not doing well. You're not your best person. Like, why take a year to get where you need to if you have something that could be impactful and help you in 3 months? And that's what it was for me. Like it's not just like a cop out. Like it really was this amazing assist.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Because I've never done, not that that's a drug. I've
Yeah.
never done drugs. I've never drank. I've never done any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've talked to a lot of people that have done, I might even get these mixed up, but like ecstasy or different ones that are psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to people like that and they've been like, you just do it once. Like just do it once to just have the experience.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds like that's kind of what you're saying. Like there is
Yeah.
some type of grounding or, well, I mean, you put it better than I would.
Yeah. It's trippy to know that your mind, like it's like Matrix in a way, like which pill do you take? And all of a sudden you're like in this whole other experience. You're like, wait, can my mind always do that? And I'm restricting it? Or is it just because of this drug or because of this experience that it's psyching me out? Like that's kind of been my thought process of curiosity. But I agree with them. Like to me, to have the psychedelic experience of it was amazing and so crazy. But also to like have that type of experience is really, really cool. And
Yeah.
in the world where it's legal, like it's helpful.
So they have someone just sitting next to you the whole time?
Yeah, they were in the room and
you're just like kind of on a little trip?
oh yeah, it was actually really funny because you just sit in this recliner. They get you like a cozy little weighted blanket and like I think, did I bring an eye cover?
You didn't want your
At
eyes
first,
all freaking
yeah.
out in the middle of it?
Well, and they put on music and they shut the blinds. Like it was really weird at first. I'm like, this is an interesting medical setup. Like, am I about to? Are the cops gonna come in? Like, what is this? But
yeah. Then you just got Mary sitting next
yeah,
to you. Just
yeah.
like,
Then I thought that'd be weird. I'm like, can you just not be here? But they actually, it was very tender, like and sweet. Like I remember the other two times, like they were so different in a way, just because of who it is or who's there. Like the third one was actually a girl that I knew. It was my friend's little sister. So that was like a whole interesting experience. But again, in the positivity of like who you meet and who's there is all like for a meaning and a purpose. And like having her there was a cool like conversation to have before jumping in. But yeah, they just kind of read I don't know what they do. Like they'll ask halfway through checking in, but
so they're just, so why are they there? They're just making sure
because
that
your blood pressure could go up. They just want to make sure that like
so they're like
stability wise that you're not dropping or going off the
so
rails.
there's some type of nurse or something.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's just for
like,
care. Like if you're dealing with some major trauma and like it awakens something that like you need somebody to ground you and be there, or like all of a sudden you're in outer space, like in some psychedelic land and you feel like you've gotten lost. Like that's what was nice for me. Like
that sounds terrifying.
yeah, like it is. There's no reason to the rhyme on like the whole experience, but that's where I'm like, yeah, like everyone should see what that experience is like. Like it's fascinating. Like in the Inception setup of, I'm like, whoa, like this doesn't make any sense, but like, all right, let's go there. But,
see, I don't know if
yeah.
I'd be open to that. Like
Yeah.
I'd be nervous to know what doors get opened up.
well, none of it makes any sense. And you're like, at one point, like the one thing that I thought was funny that did make sense, I love sunflowers. And at one point I was a sunflower. Like, I remember thinking that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a sunflower. But that was the only thing that kind of made sense. And then everything else, I was trying to solve. I realized between all three what I was consistently doing. And that was a helpful thing, is in each realm that you're in total Alice in Wonderland, it doesn't make any sense. I was trying to figure it out. I remember one of the times they were checking in on me, and I'm like, am I doing this right? Like I was looking for that validation of like, I'm doing this right? Like, give me the thumbs up that this is, she's like, you're here. Like that's what it is. And that was an interesting realization of like, oh, between each thing, like I'm still looking to do it the right way and solve it and accomplish
Instead of just being present.
the drug.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely fascinating, and I can see how it has been so helpful for people.
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with friends that are doing businesses, and I mean, not even just businesses, but just trying to progress in general. Family members, friends, and I've had friends pitch me businesses, and I'm like, yeah, dude, that's going to work out in your life and your business and your family, whatever. Like, yeah, I think you're on the right track. But it's interesting that, and I'll kind of tie this into what you're saying. It's interesting that people need like permission. And I've had that realization years ago where you'll have conversations with people and I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's what you need to go do. You're right. And it's like, I know you're right.
Yeah.
But it's like you need someone to tell you and give you permission to proceed in
Yeah,
that.
it's so fascinating. I think it's a youngest child syndrome. I'm not sure, or like coming in a younger family of like, or maybe it's just human nature.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know,
validation.
but the validation's a big deal. I think culturally, like growing up, for me, part of that was like growing up Mormon, like you always got approvals into certain things. That played a big impact. But it was funny. I had a friend like call me out one time, like when we were talking through it, as some form of fashion. It was into relationships, and she was like, "Do you know?" She's like, "I don't know if you recognize this, but she's like, you always come from a place of like broken, like whenever you're like you're a problem to be solved." She's like, you don't need somebody to solve you. Like you're totally great, and you're totally can trust yourself to do exactly what you need to do. Like, I don't know if you recognize that this is something you're looking for, that validation and somebody to give you like, am I doing this right? Is this what I should be doing? Is this the route I should be going? She's like, why don't you just know that you got it and you can take care of it? And like, that was a shift for me. I'm like, why do I do that?
Wow.
But I think in the whole realm of validation, like it made me realize how much I do it to other people too. 'Cause you want to just make them feel good and also like be there with them and like the excitement or the like, yes, absolutely, that's great. But there's other ways that you could verbally, like at least for me as I've recognized it, of trying to get away from giving them, oh, that's the right thing. Like who's to say that's the right thing or what is the right thing? But it is fascinating how there's such a, it isn't, once you start being aware of it, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to change so much of my conversation to help. And there's so much more power in just trusting somebody. Like, yeah, does that sound great to you? Like that would be so amazing. I think you could do anything you want to do.
And if it's not the right thing, you're going to get to the end of that.
Yeah.
Adjust.
And you'll figure it out. But that it was like that was another step for me where I'm like, it was a good call out. And then I realized, oh, like, you know what? I can trust myself, and I don't know why I need to like go to somebody else to say if this is right or wrong. Although then it goes to the other extreme too, where I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I can do
There's
this.
no middle ground.
Yeah.
Huh?
I'm like, okay, maybe I can balance out a little bit, but let me like kind of go back and forth a little bit. But
Well,
yeah.
and I think that's just growing up. You're told to do everything right. You're told to practice. You're told to win. You're told to be competitive. You're told or at least I was. I guess I shouldn't talk
Yeah, in
for
sports,
everyone.
like it's a whole win, right?
Yeah, and then you kind of get thrown out on by yourself in adulthood, and you have family, friends, whatever to kind of go off of, but you never it took me time to understand that like you're not supposed to win everything.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be perfect. You're not supposed to always be right. But when you're not, it's okay. And I think that's the hardest part, and it cripples people. Like if you're not right, and if you're not positive, if you come out, I mean, it's whatever you make of it, right? Positive's not the right word, because I think you can make any outcome positive if you're going to learn from it or you're right. But I think it's a hard lesson for people to get. And I know people that are twice our age that still struggle with it. And I'm like, it's okay, dude. Like you did it wrong, but how are you going to do it next time?
Yeah. The vulnerability of it, like it is hard to wear that on the sleeve. And I know even for myself that I mean, yeah, that's a whole process to it, but definitely like to find that there's such power in being like, yeah, that was wrong, or that I don't know what I'm doing. That's another part of my personality. I'm like, oh no, I've got this. Like, and I'm like, you know, I'm just figuring it out. So
Yeah.
I'll still do it well, but like, give me some learning time, because
Right.
it's gonna. But I think that's in that vulnerable side. It's hard to be the beginner. It's hard to be wrong. It's hard to be in a transition of some sort. Those are all uncomfortable feelings.
But why? So, I mean, that goes
Yeah.
even deeper. So why are they uncomfortable though? Like you're just programmed that way? Cause like you look at like Michael Jordan or high achievers, and I mean, Ed Milet, any of these guys that are extreme ownership, Jocko, like any of these guys, when things get hard or you're wrong or you're uncomfortable or you're anything, they strive in that stuff. they thrive. They say strive. They thrive in all that stuff. That's like they almost look forward to those opportunities to push forward.
But I bet that was a muscle they had to strengthen. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, so how do you get to that point that's almost like a flow state for them?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to get there. So.
Well, I don't have the answer
Yeah,
either. I'm just.
It is fascinating though, because for me it was more the acknowledgement of like I'm doing this habit, and you just in the same way that it's muscles, like mine has been, and I've been incredibly grateful for the people in my life, like my family, my whole examples there. Like even though we're all very opinionated into what we think things should be in a way, like that's been a helpful guide to me at times. But I think my journey right now has been more being able to see it and try not to lose focus of that, like has helped me when I go to then into what I naturally would go to hide from that feeling or that uncomfortableness. It's a muscle I'm trying to rechange. But yeah, and that's having the amazing people that we put like their pro status and what they do. And it's been amazing to like see that, okay, like this is, at least I can get to that point and guide however they, like that's been part of my journey is like, I want to, however they're doing it, I'm going to try to mimic some of that because I think that'll help reshape some of these practices.
Sure.
But
yeah,
it's uncomfortable though. I hate it. I hate being vulnerable.
But I think that's the point though. Like I think you're supposed to get to that point and then push forward.
Yeah.
And I think it's immaturity is a lot of it. So at least where I'm at in my life now, I've seen that where, I mean, I'm doing stuff all the time that I'm not comfortable with this. I mean, so this was like a thing that I had to get past and become comfortable with it. With our store, we've started doing like video ads. And so we just do like we just did this infomercial goofy video ad for our safe store, you know, and I shown it to my brothers, and I was always the one that like I let them be in the front. I wanted to be in the back. I don't want people to notice me. And even when we're around friends and family, I don't like that. And so to put a video ad out there where I'm like trying to be Billy Mays and selling a safe, you know, and so I think that you're supposed to get to those uncomfortable stages. And that's the only way that you can progress is you get to that point and then you push against it.
Well, I bring it up of your podcast when you were telling me your story of like you knew you wanted to do it, but like how much you hated like the limelight or even like not
I still
knowing
get
what
nervous
to do.
when we start.
I thought it like that was my first thought. I'm like, man, he was scared, but he wanted to do this so much that he still moved forward and just watching it and jumping into it. Like major respect. Like, and I thought that I'm like, man, it's not just you naturally, okay, I'm going to do this and this will be totally fine.
I'm not this guy normally.
Yeah. But the action of going forward on it, I'm like, I remember I wanted to do the drum line, like the, you know, like the four drums that you're like in the marching band. That was always my dream growing up. And I even like took drums for a year gearing up for it in high school. I'm like, I'm going to be in the marching band. I'm so excited. And I took one day of band class and they gave me like the chimes or what is it, the cymbals. And I was annoyed because I'm like, I've taken a year of drums. Like I'm not being the cymbal person. And I went to lunch with friends and they like giggled that I was in band class. And that's all it took. I freaking gave up on my dream. I was out. And even to this day, like I think, you know, Patch Adams, the movie, like where he would like take the older people through like their one dream. I'm like, if I get a Patch Adams in my life, I'm going to be in a freaking drum band. Like I just want to like do the little, I don't know. It's still like a calling for me, but just that fear of action forward, like was so silly to just walk away from that. But here you are like 52 episodes into what you were so scared to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, like we're in our 30s now. Like if you'd put me in high school and done this, there's not a chance.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no way I would have been this person.
Yeah, that's why adulthood is so great though. Like it's hard, it's crazy, but I'm like, man, in some ways it's so nice to be past.
Yeah.
But then there's other fear things like that we run into. But yeah, I think it's so cool that you just jumped right into it.
Thanks. I've had a few people say it and I'm like, dude, it is hard. It is hard for me to get on this. Like every time when I'm getting ready to address the camera to open, like I still get like a little fidgety and I like take a breath and I like I pause. So like for people that don't know and haven't been on here, we're recording before we ever start, right?
Yeah.
And so I give Mallory like a clean spot to cut and then we open. But I like take that for myself. Like Mallory needs that pause, but I do it for myself to like gather my thoughts for a second and relax. And the funniest thing, and I'm glad that Mallory corrected me, but I'm terrified of like saying someone's name wrong. And like the first thing you do, you open it up and say their name wrong, you know, and then, I mean, and it's not live. So like we could just start over, but I don't know. It just,
No, you had it so smooth though. Like when we had that moment, I'm like, oh, he's got this now. But
well, I've done it 52 times.
but and how impressive you've done it every week. Like that's the dream is one thing, and then all of a sudden you get into the work and the grind of it, and I'm like, oh, this isn't as fun anymore. But here you are. Like that consistency is like the whole next level to like showing up.
Well,
that's cool.
I've told Mallory, like there's times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got the podcast tonight. And I mean, I run 4 businesses every day. And like today, my wife's working late. So I had to run. I closed my store at 6. I ran on Sunset. I ran to the hospital where my kid has daycare, picked up him, ran over to like Hidden Valley Townhomes where my mom lives, dropped him off, and then ran back over here.
Yeah, you described all the things you do, and I was tired. I should do more.
And so,
you accomplish a lot.
Yeah, so I can't remember where I was going with that, but I just about just being tired to do it, and at that point I can't cancel 20 minutes before, right? But there's times we're a week ahead, so we try to stay a week ahead in case something comes up and we just can't get it done. But it seems like every time we're a week ahead, something comes up the next week. But I think it's because it's easy to be like, oh, just push it off a week. Like we already have one loaded.
Yeah.
But no, it's been a fun thing. I think if anyone's ever thought about doing this, and it's opened my eyes doing this to where I talk to people like my buddy Tyson's in marketing, Brandon Neal and Jeff Fieldstead that have been on our podcast just started their own that Mallory's helping them with. And not that that's influenced by me, but I'm always just like, there's something you're doing in your life that you could do something like this around, like you with tourism. And I mean, you could even do it around healthcare and administration. I mean, you've been through enough things that you could do something like this.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said of like all of a sudden being in the room and seeing like, oh, this is what that is, like gives you that courage forward of your own. But that's such a cool life human like example too, I think of, which example is such a funny word to me, going back to like, am I doing it right? Like be that example. But in you doing what you're doing, like you give permission to so many other people to like live their dream and like overcome that fear too. Like that alone, like does so much. It's a ripple effect that I think is really cool to see happen between like what you're doing to hearing that. I'm like, man, what a cool ripple. Yeah. But yeah, I think in my realm, like there's certain areas that it's great to be on the other side of the fence on some stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. But in this, what I'm in now of the industry of tourism, like I'm still such a newbie that I am so grateful for amazing humans that have the patience and like the willingness to share, like and the curiosity. Like there have been so many guides just in this industry and the most amazing people to meet. Like that's what's great about humans. Like people are just so great and wonderful, but it's been hard to be the new, like the novice of learning. Like it's hard to be on that end now when I was on this healthcare side of like, you knew how everything worked, but I'm so grateful to have people that just are willing to share that and give that information too. And that's just the ripple effect that continues because they were there too at one point, but
right. That's what I was going to say, because you don't have the confidence to do stuff until you've done stuff.
Yeah.
And so like when we were talking in high school, like that one person laughs at either one of us and we get off our, what our goals are. And now it's like, well, I've done things. So like someone laughing at me for doing a podcast, I'm like, cool, man, it's not you. Like it doesn't affect me, you know, like that's it would when you're in high school. And so when and we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, like if there were kids that had, and if you want to debate me on this, I would love to. If not you, but just anybody.
I'm like, okay.
You're like, oh, we're serious.
Here we go. Let me get a drink.
Like people that were confident in high school, because I thought I would say I was a confident person in high school, but it was all fake. I mean, because you have no reason to be confident. Like if you had a reason to be confident at 14, like I would love to know what that is, because I don't think it exists. And so there's all these kids that looked like they were confident, and it's not like a fake it till you make it kind of thing, but you have to go do things. And so I think when you get older, you gain that confidence because you've done, or not everybody has, but the people that are confident, it's because they've done things.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, because I think back on the people that I would be like, oh, they had it all together in high school. I'm curious how much of that was real.
Yeah.
Like for me, I was just such a butterfly all over the place. I think it's been funny though. I feel like I've gotten, it's as an adult, like the confidence and how it shifts. Like it really is that reminder at a point where you're like, oh, we're all just in this together.
Yeah.
Like in those moments where I'm like, this is so out of my like comfort zone. But then you realize, oh, we're all just here figuring it out. But
That's true.
It completely. And then even as an adult now, like it's been so amazing to see the people that don't let it hold back, like the ones in hI school that you were like, I don't know what they're doing, but now you see them and you're like, dude, they're amazing.
Yeah.
And just the action forward, kind of a setup. But that's been like, there's no end result. Like I remember talking to a sister that she was really sad that she hadn't. I mean, our brothers have accomplished amazing things, and so there's this intimidation of like, yeah, I'm the sibling. And I just was like, you know what? This isn't like the end goal right here. Like you could be in this next 10 years, do something that is your amazing. Mm-hmm. And it was because like, it's a good reminder for yourself too, where you're like there's not a finish line that's like, I've done this. Cause even at that point, like it could be gone so instantly. And like how much of your identity is tied into what you think you've achieved. Yeah. But it's a good reminder as an adult, I think, for myself, and even just as I talking in that setting, I'm like, oh, like you hear somebody else and what their sadness or their feeling is, and you're like, oh my gosh, no, like you could do this in 10 years and it'll be just fine. Yeah. There's no race.
Well, it's like I'll bring up Eric Gubler again because we both know him. Like he's killing it right now. And so, but you think that he was 100% comfortable in going into all the ventures that he's in right now? I guarantee he wasn't. Yeah. Like if he was sitting right here, I guarantee you'd say he wasn't. Yeah. And it's like, and now he's building this storage facility, and it kind of segued off the moving company he started, you know, and it's like, I'm sure he wasn't like, I'm going to be 100% successful in this thing. I know it 100%. Yeah. You know, like you everything you go into, there's a little bit of fear involved.
Yeah. There was an my brother just shared a podcast about, like, it's good to be ignorant to a certain point, because if you realized how much work was ahead of you for something, you may not ever do it.
That's a good point.
But then even on the, like, how much of these major businesses, like when you dive into what they really initially thought they were starting, they aren't even the same thing. Yeah. So it's amazing in Eric's story where he's like, he really just started when he started the moving business, well, maybe he already had the storage. Did he already have storage in mind? Like it's just.
I don't think he was doing. Well, I know he wasn't doing it, but I don't think that was the plan.
That wasn't the goal. Into that. Yeah, and that's a nice reminder too, where you're like, okay, I don't have to have like start to finish figured out. Like I'm gonna start with this, and then.
Well, I was gonna bring it back to your healthcare stuff. Yeah, like you got to that point, and then it moves on to something else.
Well, and that strengthened my courage so much in like making that step. Like I was paralyzed for a second of like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. And that's when I read Brian's like post of like, gosh, I wish I remembered what's on there, but it gave me that push where I'm like, you know what? I can always go back. Like if I need to, I'll figure it out. Like this isn't the end all be all. Like I'm so like hesitant when it's not like this is the final choice. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you realize how easy that was, or like how not as scary as it was. And you're like, oh, I think I can do that with other stuff too. Yeah. And it's amazing, like you kind of paddleboard back and forth, right? Like the moments of like you're afraid to do the next thing and you're like, okay, I have to re-push myself to do this, and like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But yeah.
And when I talk to people about stuff they're scared in, I'm always like, what's the alternative? So it's like, so you leaving the healthcare facility. Mm-hmm. Okay, well if you don't, you're going to stay here and you'll work a 9 to 5 and you'll probably be all right. Yeah. But if you leave, then you can go chase another dream. But if it doesn't work out, you can go back, you know, or like people right now that want to start their own businesses. I'm like, dude, give it a year, give it 2 years, see what it's like. And if it sucks, go work at Arby's for $17 an hour.
Yeah.
What's the fear here? What's the worst thing that can happen?
Well, and I think for me, I remember like early in my 20s being like, I don't want plan B. I don't want plan C. Sorry, some people, that actually sounds funny, saying plan B. I'm like, maybe I should. But I don't want an alternate. I want what was supposed to be the first choice. And that like paralyzed me to so much where I'm like, no, like don't give me the alternate route. Like that means I messed up or like I missed out on this major opportunity. It was such a weird, like even in choosing school or where I went, like it felt so like there was this right thing, like going back to that thought. But it's amazing to realize like if you don't make it so concrete, like so like the right, whatever that right is for you will find its way forward. Like it's not so like so much of an equation that you're going to mess up. Like just be open to it. And that's been like in starting a business or whatever other people are looking at, I could definitely see that if we just it'd be amazing to see like if we loosened up to like being open to the course being a little more fluid, like how much more courage would we have instead of trying to find like that finality of choice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk circles around this stuff a lot because I have these conversations with people all the time.
Yeah.
And you start to realize, and I think you'll realize this too with people, you'll have these conversations that you've already had with other people, or maybe there's a better way to put this. You would have these conversations so many times that you move past that and you progress. Mm-hmm. And then someone comes in and they're having a conversation with someone else that you've already had. And now I'm like, well, yeah, no duh. And then I have a realization of like, well, they've just not been in these conversations before. And not that I'm ahead of them or anything else, but I'm like, you have to have these conversations to get to the next place. Mm-hmm. And I'm making that very vague, but a lot of this stuff for me, just my daily life is business things.
I was going to say for you having your podcast, like you're in that communication.
Yeah.
Like in and out, like consistently have that conversation that for that other person, that realization, like it takes somebody pushing them to talk about it. Like, oh yeah, like that, to hear it out loud, like it's their awakening,
right.
You know? But yeah, I think sorry, maybe that's not even what you're hitting on, but just
it is.
Was interesting to realize. I'm like, oh yeah, it's amazing how like what is natural or an obvious thing for us, we're like, oh, they just haven't had the opportunity to see that yet. Or in my setting, chatting with you, I'm like, yeah, like there's certain thoughts in my head now. I'm like, this is good to be chatting about it because it just makes you more like thoughtful into like what are, at least for me, my back thought is I'm like, man, this is good to acknowledge because like what are my fears additional like that I'm maybe would want to do more of, you know, that.
Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not like this completely fearless person whatsoever because I am not that guy.
Oh,
but
we always have them. But,
yeah. I mean, my mind mainly revolves around business things. Mm-hmm. And so like in business wise, like I really don't have a lot of fear. I feel like at the end of the day, we're doing the right things. I'm doing the right things with our businesses. We have the right things in place. I've prepped us for the next 6 months. I've done all these things. And so I'm like, I don't know how we can fail. And if we do, I'll just work harder, you know? And with that said, I mean, we've definitely hit potholes, you know? I mean, I've had to personally fund a couple things that I've made mistakes on. Like I had to go pull a loan out on my truck at one point because we made mistakes on a few things. So like, don't get me wrong, I've made those mistakes. And that's why I think I can say that of like, okay, well, I've done these things and I've learned these lessons. So now I can project this out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm curious with your businesses, is the end goal like it seems like for most people, like they want to retire early, right?
Sure.
So then you can go and do all these other things.
I don't know.
Is for you, it's the chase of getting it, or?
I to be honest, like when I admire people like you that have like career-wise, like a goal and a thing you're setting and going that route. And maybe I am in a different language of the way I do it, but I don't know what I want to do. I mean, that's the short answer. Like, I've never been like, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a doctor. Like, I've never been that guy. Mm-hmm. I thought for a short amount of time I wanted to be a mechanic when I was in high school. And then it turned into, I don't know, I just want to do something with cars. And then I'd ran a parts store for a few years in my late teens, and I loved it, but I was like, I don't really know if this is for me. And then my driving force has been financials, right? So even when I worked for the post office, they sit down, you hit a career employee, which I got to. They lay out the pay scale for you. And I'm like, wait, so you're telling me I got to be here for 30 years,
Yeah.
like older than I already am, and you're going to max me at like 60K? And for people that do that, that's great. That's just not who I am.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I had a hard time with it. And the postmaster, we're friends. He like turns the paper around to me and he's all, congratulations, in 30 years, this is what you're going to be making. And in 37 years, you can retire. And I was just like, that. I don't think this is for me. And I've always worked for myself because I don't think I'm a good employee. Because I speak my mind. Like if I'm the boss, that's great. But if I have someone over me, I usually butt heads with them a lot.
I'm so grateful you are your own then, because there's so many people I've worked with where I'm like, then go do it.
Yeah.
Like don't sit here and give the opinion.
Yeah, good point.
But then absolutely go out and see how much harder it is to do it then. Like,
Yeah.
Those people in the middle where I'm like, please don't, if you're not willing to be in the grind and do it and figure out that this solution's a lot harder than the opinion sounds. I love when people actually then just go do it. I'm like, oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, and I'll refer back to that postmaster. We've had even, so I did a contract route for a little bit. That's what got me into the post office. And then I worked for the post office, and now I'm back to owning contract routes. In the beginning, I didn't own the routes. I worked for someone else, but that's how it kind of got me in. And Sean is the postmaster in Hurricane. I think he's actually transitioning right now, but for all these years he has been. And him and I, like at first, like we butted heads a lot. And then there was a couple times where I disagreed, and I'd go in his office and he'd be like, you got a minute? And then we'd sit down and like, there were times we were like mad, like just hashing it out. But every time after that, whenever I left his office, we were on the same page. And so he kind of understood who I was. And then I still had that respect factor that he was my boss, And so once we got to that point, we were great. And to this day, like I could text him or I could call him right now and he'd pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Like we have a great relationship now.
That's a cool communication. And honestly, I could get better at that of like, I'm an avoider of certain things when it comes to like direct communication, which is funny because in work, that's a different story. But how cool to hear that like in your relationship that like helped build the bridge of like where you guys are to on both levels, right?
Right. Yeah. And I that's why I've always butted heads with people. Because I don't have a problem speaking my mind. And I'm not even saying I'm right, but I'm just like, hey man, you have a different view than I do. And so this is the view all of us are seeing that you don't. And so I always felt like I had to go in and talk for everyone else because
like, you're
nobody
the voice
else
of the
would.
people.
Yeah. Or I was like the smart ass and in the middle of everyone else just yelling something at the boss because nobody else would. And so, yeah, once we got on that level, we were great. But it's also changed a lot of how I run things. Like I actually have my older brother and my mom both work for me.
Sorry,
and then
move around a little bit.
Yeah, you're fine. My older brother and my mom work for me. And then I have another kid at the store. Him and I pretty much run the store. My mom helps out a little bit. And then I have 3 other people that work mail routes for me. And so just the management that I managed that part store when I was young, like too young. And then going through and seeing how the post office was ran, and the post office is ran shitty. Like I'll just say it like it is. There's a lot of great people. There's a lot of great postmasters, but just as a whole, the business is ran like garbage.
Interesting.
And our parents, like I'd be interested to see what our parents' age people think. Because I was always told post office is a great job. Like if you can get into the post office, you're
that's
a
what I
career
hear.
thing. And so I did, and I was like, this is it. Like my wife has better insurance than I do. Like our retirement's okay, and I'm only gonna it's gonna take me like 20 years to even get to the highest pay, And so I went through it, and I'm like, dude, if this is what everyone's striving for, like I'm different.
Yeah.
And now I'm not even sure where I was going with all that.
No,
but
it's that is a fascinating thing where it's like, wait, this like what standard are we going to right now? Like that shifts a lot of even what you may trust.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to
From
say.
other
I
opinions.
wonder if it's like a generational thing where I think our generation is a little different than that, even though it sounds like you were more of like, oh, and my wife's this way. Let me go do my 9 to 5 and then I'm gonna go do what I want. And I'm like, okay, I've worked 17 straight hours and my phone's always on. You know, people can call and text me and maybe they're not showing up
I'm
tomorrow.
the worst blend because I'm not done at 5. Like that's where I'm like, okay, I see a lot of people being done at 5, but yeah, but when you're in it too, I'm curious, you saw how it was done wrong. Once you then had to be the one doing it, like what was that experience like for you?
I think it, along with you, like you were talking about extreme ownership, that's helped me out a lot with being a boss. And I think that I don't even like to call myself a boss. Like we do the jobs together, you know, like I don't ask any of them to do stuff I wouldn't do or haven't done, or like, to be blunt, that I couldn't do better than everyone else. But I think that going into it, I'm always like, okay, I've never done this before, guys. Like we're all trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
So if you have a suggestion that you think I'm doing wrong, tell me, because I probably am, you know, because I've never been this guy.
That's gotta be but how great for them, how refreshing to hear that too.
Well, yeah. I think at the store, because I've had 2 young kids that they didn't really have any other work experience.
They're like, we don't know.
And so I'm always like, because I'm pretty lenient at the store. I'm just like, hey, like there's days that there is nothing to do. Like we're just waiting for customers to come in. Like maybe you can mop the floor, you know?
Yeah.
And, but when I line up A, B, and C, I expect all those to be done, you know, but I'm pretty lenient about all of it. And I'm always telling Abram, who's there now, I'm like, dude, you got to understand, like, this isn't a normal job. Like, where you can hang out on TikTok or Instagram until a customer comes in, that's not normal.
Yeah, like,
you know?
Let's acknowledge you find another job that's going to be a shock.
Yeah, so I'm all, and we'll talk things over. Hey, dude, this is kind of what's coming up. You know, what do you think we should do? And I'm sure he's sitting there like, bro, I'm 17.
Yeah.
You know? But I think just having a little bit of ownership in those decisions makes it more real for him as well. And I hope it does. I mean, that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Like, it definitely has to be like a weird moment for him, but he's just never been asked. Like, I'm thinking if that were me, I'm like, oh, that would be a weird experience, but like a helpful experience that like, oh, I could think through this as well.
Well, and with the mail route people, so I've got 4 people out there, including my brother. And I'm always just like they'll call, they pretty much deal with all of it. So don't get me wrong. There's months where the only time I hear anything is when they give me their days and I cut checks. Like that's it. I mean, they know what is to be done. It's a fairly easy job,
That's nice.
you know?
Yeah.
But there's times they'll call me and I'm like, what do you think? Okay, well, dude, like, you're the one that's going to be the first person that's going to be contacted, not me. So like, what do we need to do to get you on the same page as me? Or, you know what I mean? And so I go through those things with them instead of just saying, do this, do this, do this. And it's helped me because like I said, I don't have the answers. I mean, I'm trying to figure it out like they are. At the end of the day, I'm the one responsible, but you know, I try to get as much input as I can.
Yeah. Long-term wise, I see that being incredibly helpful because in my problem solving, I've recognized this whenever I've been in like a leadership spot that they'll come to me with a problem. And early on, I'd be like, oh, well, here's what we could do, or here's how we could fix it. And I had one of my bosses be like, you know what, your life would be so much easier if you just ask them, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, well, that sounds really hard. Like, what are you going to do about it? And just throw it back out. And I'm like, the amount of work it took off my load of like how much I was trying to do. And they're like, you have all these directors, like let them direct. And in that realm of like allowing them to give the solutions and be a part of that, like make sure how much time does that save?
Right.
So that's been a big learning curve for me that even still, like I find my natural tendency like, oh, let's jump in and let's do this and we can figure it out. And I'm like, how about if I trusted them to figure it out and like ask that question back?
Sure.
That'll make it so much easier. And as a business owner, like that's the only route that you could
Well, and
you would be.
I'm sure one of these guys will text me and be like, you remember that time you were like, do A, B, and C?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure there's still moments where,
Be like, hey.
yeah, I'm busy
Yeah.
and I'm like, just do this, you know, but that's what I'm striving to be is, hey, you know, you have some ownership in this as well. You have decision making in this as well. You know, yeah, I'm where it ends with me, but you could still be affected by this decision,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I always assumed I'd work for myself when I was like in my early 20s, when I kind of started my first LLC and doing my own thing. But I never thought I'd have like multiple employees, you know, doing multiple things. And
Yeah. That's cool though.
we have different vehicles and different people working every day. And so it's kind of a trip.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's funny because for me, I feel like I'm a hybrid where like I really should be between what I do, like it would probably be more beneficial for me if I worked on my own, but I love the blend of like accomplishing a goal in an organization setup that it makes for at certain times I'm like, I don't own this business. Like, what am I doing? But I think in your world of like graduating from like being your own person to then hiring and having all these extra individuals, like what a interesting dynamic of like now you have to figure it out and be that you're the person that you've been criticizing and okay, now it's up to you. Like, how are you going to do it?
And I'm not perfect at it. Like I said, I mean, I do my best, but I'm still making mistakes every day, you know?
No, but you're doing it. I think that's really cool.
I hope I never stop making mistakes, to be honest. I mean, I've had that thought too of like, when do you ever figure it out? And I'm like, I don't know. It sounds awful boring once you figure it out. Like, I always hope there's something to work towards, you know?
Well, I'm curious, outside, coming back to that, of like, okay, so you're just doing this because it seems like you just find something that's interesting to you.
Yeah, I was going to say,
then you go tackle that. Like, what do you do outside of work? Like, it's just all business. Like, that's all your mind is in.
Seriously, all I do.
That's amazing. What does your wife think of all that?
She knows that's who I am, but she doesn't love it.
Yeah. She's like, when are we going to play?
Yeah. Well, so I went on a bear hunt earlier this month. Yeah, like the first of the month. And I haven't done anything like outside of work. Like, so we have a little property in Duck Creek that a trailer's on.
Yeah.
And so
talk about a tourism hub.
Yeah. Like my weekend getaway I'd go up there for a weekend. That's really all I've done for like years. And so to do this bear hunt, I like took a week off. So with these Mel routes, it's very restricting because it's 6 days a week. And now that I have two, like say I'm on a bear hunt out of state and an employee, and this is how my mind works, right? Like we were talking about fear. An employee gets in a car accident on the way to the post office. Well, now I have to be there, you know? And so I've always been the cover guy, I guess, to put it. And so now I have the regular person and a cover guy and then me.
That's awesome. So you're not freaking out if your phone's out of service.
Exactly.
While on the bear hunt.
Yeah. And so even like going to Duck Creek, I would make sure like Saturday everyone was good at the post office and then I would go, you know, to make sure that they didn't need anything or had to run out there, car breakdown, whatever. And so that's a lot of the reason. But with that, it's kind of just put it in my mind that I work 6-7 days a week because I always have to be by my phone in case I have to go to work. And it's been like that for a decade. And so now I went and did that bear hunt and it was like the funnest thing I've ever done in my life. If it wasn't for like my wife and kid at home, I would have paid the fee and stayed another week. Like it was that fun.
That's so cool.
And I don't know if part of it, like it really was that fun, but I think part of it was like, I haven't done anything like that in years. And so to be able to let loose and do that. And then I came back for like 3 days and then I went to Salt Lake for a conference in Salt Lake. And so it like felt like I was gone for 2 weeks, you know, and it's kind of opened me up to be more open to doing things like that, if that makes sense. And we're talking like a week ago. Like this is a brand new thought that I've had.
Good.
One thing my wife and I are trying to do, so we had Amy Stevens on the podcast. She works for a short-term rental coaching business.
Oh, cool.
So they coach you on how to buy the property, rent the property. They have tax guys, insurance guys. I mean, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bought into it, and I was like, yeah, this would be cool to like go buy a beach house somewhere and go out and do that.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I have been playing with the ideas, and she's like, I don't even know why you want to do this because you never leave. Like you never go do anything.
You're like, but if I made a business out of it,
Right? Yeah.
There's your work into it. Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, but if you could have a beach house paid for and make money on the top of that, why wouldn't you want to go do that, right?
That's the perfect blend.
And so it's kind of opening my eyes to, sure, like I finally have everything covered after all these years, at least right now. I mean, that could change tomorrow, right? I have an employee quit, and now I'm back to the cover guy. But so I don't know. You were talking about retirement. What's the end goal? And I don't know. I think I'll be blunt about two things. I've always thought I'll work till I die, but I've always thought I'm not going to live that long. Huh. It's kind of a weird thing.
How come?
I don't know. I've just always thought I'm not going to get super old.
That's interesting.
Like
well,
not like die next week.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm like, I've never seen myself as like a 80-year-old dude.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I don't think any of us do. That's like in working in assisted living and healthcare, like that was very helpful for me to realize like, okay, we better save up because we're going to have to pay for this at some point. Like that was a good introduction because we avoid like people don't plan their funerals and plan like all that out because we avoid what that looks like.
Sure.
I will say for you though, like I love hearing that the bear, like with that hunt, like I think, and especially with what I do now, like, but going back to when I was choosing to like, oh, I'm going to take that mini retirement.
Yeah.
There was just a couple of different instances that happened that I saw people in their 40s in our communities, like they'd had a stroke or they had some tragic thing happen that their body no longer could do what we take for granted. Right. And that was a big part for me too, where I realized like this could happen sooner than later. Like I need to go do stuff while I can. Yeah. My brother had some crazy health stuff happen last year that was just like another introduction into that of like, man, like we could just think we're doing just great. And now like you never know what will change. So I guess I would definitely encourage on that. Like I hope you go and see and do amazing stuff because especially if you're not thinking you're going to be living to your old life, you better do it now.
Well, I think my mindset from that's always come from like I've had back issues since like my early 20s. Mm-hmm. And then when I was at the post office and I was, I don't know, 25, 27, something like that. I mean, I was like living on painkillers. Like that's the only way I could get through the day. Mm-hmm. And then I was taking painkillers every morning and I'm usually like at the post, like no one knew for months and months and months. And so I'd take painkillers. I'd be like halfway through sorting my route and I'd like go to the bathroom and be throwing up. Oh and then I'd go back in, case the route, so sort the route. Because of medications or because of painkillers. Oh, okay. And so the painkillers would make me throw up. I'd eat with them. I tried all these different things. And then there was one day the postmaster walked in on me throwing up. And he's like, dude, are you okay? Do you need to go home? Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, dude, I got to level with you. You know, and I was like, I've been working on painkillers for months. Mm-hmm. And then so I would have painkillers to get through work. And then I'd go home and I couldn't sleep. So I would have like spasms. Oh and so I'd take muscle relaxers to go to bed. Yeah. And I did that for months. Your body. And that's when I finally just told my wife knew, but I was finally just like, I can't do it anymore. You know, I got to figure something else out. And so I feel like my body's never, and I guess let me precursor this. My body and my health has taken a back seat to everything I've tried to accomplish up to this point in my life. But I've always just thought, man, if I hurt this bad at 30, what's 60 going to be like? Yeah. And so I think that's where my mindset's come from that. Yeah. And maybe it's like, I don't want my body to hurt twice as bad when I'm 60.
Like, I hope I'm not there for that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I don't know. I've talked to my mom and my wife about that. I'm like, and I think I'm like okay with it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's kind of weird to say out loud, but I just don't think I'm going to get that old.
I think, do you feel like it helps you do more now?
Well, and I was gonna piggyback on what you were saying before I cut you off right there at the end too. But my mind has definitely shifted in the last year, probably, because I've always been like, I'm gonna put those 20-hour days in now, so I don't have to later. Yeah. And I think I said this to my brother. Or I said this to someone the other day. I'm like, dude, like tomorrow's not even guaranteed. It's like, what's 20 hours today if tomorrow's not guaranteed? And it sounds so cliche to say, but it's so true.
Yeah.
And I think so now, and my son has kind of shifted a lot of this for me. It's not a coincidence that I've had these thoughts now, you know, but I think like I try to be around him more and try to shut work off earlier and try to do those things because like you just can't, and I can't work 20-hour days anymore. Like, let's just be honest. I just can't. Like when I was younger, I was like just hammering it out.
You now have employees that they'll do it for you. So why do it when they can do it?
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question or what I was trying to piggyback on.
Well, it sounds like you're in transition. I think that, it's that ambitious goal, right? Of you want to, all these accomplishments and things that you're tackling and going through, and then fast forward, all of a sudden you're 5 years past that, you know, and how much time has gone through it. I guess I push on that because for me, I know I still have the habit of I'll put so much into work that then I have to remind myself, okay, I can balance and do these other things too, and I need to push back and do more of that. But it's a good reminder because I think we put off so much living in the accomplishing.
Yeah.
And that's been like hearing all that you're going for. I'm like, man, but where do you have fun? Like, and where do you go for fun? Like, there's just so much that,
See, that's what you and my wife would get along really well because you guys are very similar in a lot of that. And I'm like, fun.
Yeah.
Like, when do you, like, I just work. I don't know.
No, I'm like this weird blend of like, there's two like individuals in me where I'm like, no, we've got to accomplish this. And I'm like, but wait, we could go and do that fun thing too. So it's like an internal battle for sure. But
the first time I had this thought, I was talking to my wife. So I run all the financials. I run everything for us. She more than often just doesn't want to know. You know, she's like, just take care of it, you know? And we kind of had this talk one day and we were getting on the same page with a few business accounts and personal accounts and, you know, what pays for what type of thing. And she's like, you know what? I don't care. Like, as long as there's enough money for me to go on vacation when I want to, I don't care. And I was like, you seriously just work so you can go on vacation, huh? And she's like, yeah, why do you work? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, because that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, I didn't know.
there was no answer to it.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't know. I just work. And so that was the first time it like got those gears turning of like, why do you work? Like, what is the point? And when we were expecting our only kid, when we were expecting him, I started thinking, well, I'm working so I can build something for him, you know, and then I through those months, I'd be like, well, what if he doesn't even want to run a safe store or whatever I'm doing at the time? And so then I'm like, well, I just want to have something that he can take over if he wants to. And now I'm like, why? Like, just to try to be present and enjoy the time that you have now. But that I'm not great at it. That's what I'm trying to switch to right now.
It's such a battle though, because like, I don't know that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, well, if you want to accomplish and you want to go and get the stuff so then you can do all this other things, like which is wonderful. Like if it's for the sake of like you at some point won't even have to run your businesses. But I think more in the realm of like, what happens if 10 years, like that's been my fear of, I'm like, I don't want to be 10 years down the road and still not have done like some of the top, like when do I go and do that dream thing?
Yeah.
Which that's, I guess I ask and push that is just because in my brain still I'm like, oh, there's these things I know I'm going to go do. And I've had to like I already have it to where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do Nepal this winter then. Just because 2 years later, I'm still going to be dreaming about that thing that I'm too busy working and doing this other chase that our dreams could be 10 years later and still not be doing them. But it's a blend because like for you, you're such an accomplisher and like the businesses are your passion that's awesome. Like
Well, it's like it's an identity, but I don't know if it's a good thing.
No.
You know, like to be honest, I don't know if it is.
It's helpful. I agree. Like that was something that I've had to wonder, like, why does this matter? And why am I chasing, like, again, it's that gold star of like, I just want to be great at it. Like which isn't a bad thing, but to the area of I've recognized that I've gotten to enough places that all of a sudden it's not as satisfying as I wanted it to be, that I've realized, okay, I'm chasing it for the wrong reasons then. So I'm just trying to be more aware of what is it that I'm going after. But so yeah, on the identity and like we're so driven on like, well, that's part of I think the world of like one of our top 3 questions we ask is what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's going to be a big part of our identity and how much time we like when you ratio it out, like majority of our life is mostly working.
That's a good point.
So it makes sense, but I don't know. I think that you just never know where the hell's going to go. And especially if you're not planning on living till you're 60, you got some stuff you got to go do.
Got to get some things to tackle.
Yeah, but it's good to have people like your wife in our world too, because some of my dearest friends, like they are very good at like, hey, I'm going to go and I'm doing these things. I'm like, no, we've got to finish this job. So it's a good blend, I think, on both ends, because you can't be too playful. Like that's on the world of assisted living where I'd go through people's finances and I was like 22 at this point. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you have no money.
Right.
Like, what are you going to do?
But I had a great life playing all the time.
Yeah, which is, so neither one has its full, like, do it. But I think that's great that you're, it's always fast, like, coming from me not having kids, like, hearing that realm of, like, what kids pushes you into.
Yeah.
Like, it's always really cool to see, like, what it adds in.
See, I didn't think I was going to have kids.
Really?
Like, even when we were married. So we were married. We'll be married 10 years at the end of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we were getting her through school. Like, that was a goal. Like, get her through school, get her in her career, and then we'll kind of talk kids. And, like, as we went, like, 4 or 5 years, I was like, gosh, this is kind of nice.
Yeah.
You know, like, if she wants to go to Mexico and get in hostels, she can go do that. And if I want to work 20 hours, I don't know, whatever I was doing, right? But I was just like, gosh, like, that complicates so many things to have a kid. And so I was on the fence. And she was like, no, we're having a kid. But if she was on the fence or thought no, I don't think we would have. And so it's definitely been like a huge mind shift, because I was starting to get to the side of like, yeah, maybe we just won't do the kid thing. You know, maybe we just continue being happy was the joke I'd always say.
Yeah.
I'm like, why mess it up with kids? We're happy.
You're like, we have so much freedom. I know. So for me, because it seems like natural, like, oh yeah, I'll have them someday.
Sure.
There's been more opportunity lately where I'm like, oh wait, if I were to have them this year, am I okay with that? And I'm like, no.
Right.
So it's kind of been a mind shift of like, I've had to like face that where I'm like, okay, if like we just naturally think things at some point will happen. Sorry, that's such a tangent, but
no,
it's funny the things that like we think will be someday. And now I'm like, well, do I want it to be today? I'm like, no, I'm good. I still love my freedom.
I was going to say, because Jen's single as well,
Yeah,
so we're going to throw that out. So she's not only kid freedom.
True. It's not like I'm sitting with somebody saying like, well, are we having kids or not? But no, I think it's interesting to face. And even on the marriage end too, like it's like, okay, like this seems like all someday things. And now it's like, oh, if this were to be today, how do I feel about that? I'm like, I'm not so sure. But it's nice to have a partner. Like I've been curious with people with kids. I'm like, if you're on the fence, and this is being recorded, so maybe
no, I'm open.
Answer, but,
yeah, I'm sure I've talked about it already. So
I'm like, what happens if you decide you want kids and all of a sudden you have the kid and you're like, just kidding?
Yeah.
Can we take it back? Like, we don't want to be parents anymore.
We've definitely had nights like that. So William is his name. So the first like few weeks, all he did was cry. Like he cried or slept, and he slept rarely. And I was like, we made a mistake. Like, and I've talked about it on here.
Oh, okay.
And even like into the first year, I was like, gosh, dude. So I was with all 3 of my brothers. 2 of them have multiple kids. And we were all talking one day, and I was like, you freaking jackasses. Why didn't you tell me that this is what having a kid's like? And they start laughing, and I'm like, I'm not kidding. Like, I'm kind of pissed at all of you guys. Like, why wouldn't you tell me this?
I can't take him back now.
Yeah, dude,
and
the decision's made. And they were like, oh, dude, is it that bad? I'm like, no, dude, like he doesn't do anything but cry. And like for months. And I'm like, this is awful. And even like now I tell my wife, I'm like, we have one, dude, we're done. Like, I'm not doing this again. And
is she kind of pushing for a second, or she's like, no, we're good?
She flip flops, to be honest. I mean, I think vocally, because I'm like, yeah, dude, we're done. She's like, yeah, he's an only child now, you know, or anytime he's like freaking out, I'm like, dude, you want to go through this again? You know, like we're almost halfway through it now, you know, and she'll be like,
halfway through it, he's 2.5.
well, I mean, like through that stage of him not being able.
He's only 18 months, right?
18, yeah. But I just mean like he can't really talk yet. He doesn't, and he's starting to get into tantrums. So like, if you sternly tell him no, he'll like run over to wherever carpet is, and he'll just like flop down and be mad about it, you know. And so, so I was gonna say, like, it's really only been the last few months where I'm like, all right, this dude's kind of cool. You know, like this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Like, sure, we have our times where I'm like, dude, so Father's Day, right? A couple days ago, we went up Duck Creek. Duck Creek's like how I stay sane, right? And so we go, my wife plans it all. She gets all the food ready, gets everything ready. I delivered a couple safes for the store, and then we headed up there. And we get up there, do dinner, go to bed. Will's up at 2 a.m.
Oh no.
Freaking out, screaming, crying. And my wife's like trying to take care of it. You know, it's like supposed to be Father's Day, you know. And so we're in a camp trailer. And so she like takes him to the other side of the camp trailer and is trying to calm him down. So this goes on from 2 to 4 a.m.
Oh,
He's just mad.
Yeah.
And there's like nothing you can do. He's just mad. And I think it's because he's like, I don't know where I am. You know, like he's
like, where's my comfortable
yeah,
setting?
like he's starting to get old enough to realize he's not at home. Like we did this last year, but he was like 6 months old, you know? And so finally at like 4:15, I was like, dude, you just want to go home? Like, just pack it up. And she's like, yeah, let's just go. So we pack it up and roll. And
you came home.
So I drove home. So we drove home, got home at like 6:30 in the morning. And he sleeps the whole way home, right? And then I think he woke as soon as we get home. I go put him in his crib, and he's awake in like 2 minutes. And he's crying.
He's crying. Oh,
yeah, he's crying. He's awake. Yeah. So I go get him out, and then we're hanging out on the couch, and Amanda's like trying to stay awake to take care of him. And I'm like, dude, just go to sleep, man. And I mean, I had crushed a monster on the way home, you know, at 4 a.m. So
you're buzzing.
yeah. And so I'm sitting there like kind of playing with him, taking care of him. And I'm trying to like get him to go to sleep. And he finally knocks out. And I would think at a younger me, I'd have been like super upset. But the whole time I was just like, dude, this is just part of it, man. Like this. And I told Amanda as we were getting into the truck, I was all, dude, this is just going to be a story one day. Like, 'cause she's upset, you know, and I'm like, this is just going to be a story. Like,
man, that's cool to have that perspective though.
And I don't always, but it was just that moment. I was just like, yeah, you know, like this kind of sucks. Like it's 4 a.m. and I got to drive home in the dark now. But the whole time I was just like, no, it's just another thing that happened. This is part of having kids, I guess.
Yeah. It's good to have the openness though. 'Cause really I asked another friend, I'm like, I wonder how many, there's no way that parents like, I don't know, I'm stuck on this, but it was a curious thing to me. Like that you hear that it's all the beautifulness, which is wonderful. And that is tricky at times. I'm like, there has to be people that are like,
oh no,
just kidding.
Yeah. Like I wouldn't like hit rewind by any means. Like I love my son, but like, yeah, there's definitely times where we're like, dude, this sucks.
Yeah.
You know,
we need a nanny.
Yeah.
Take
like,
him.
like our joke was always, like you leave kids, this is going to be awful. Like we leave kids at the fire station.
Yeah.
Like that's what you do. And so our joke was always like, we knew how far it was to every fire station that surrounded our house.
You're like, we could make it in 2 miles.
And there were times where there was one time we lived in Washington at the time, and there's that new fire station kind of north of Washington or newer. And we went and like on the way home from my mom's house, we went and like put him in front of the fire station in his car seat and took a picture of him.
Oh, okay. I'm like, and then what'd you do?
Yeah, and then we sent it to my mom, and we're like, yeah, we just decided we can't do it anymore.
We're out.
Yeah. And she's like, that's not even funny.
Yeah. Oh, she's like, where is it?
Yeah. But I mean, like right
That's
now
good.
he's with my mom, and he's I'm sure he's sleeping now, but
When did you guys end up back in Utah?
I've always been in Utah.
Wait. Oh, Washington City.
Sorry, Washington City.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. I'm like, you moved to Washington State?
No. No, so when you were talking, I was saying, are you a lifer? When I was dating Amanda, she was applying for the nursing programs, and she applied to all of them in Utah. So all the ones up north. And I'm sorry. Whenever I say up north, I always think it's like north of Cedar.
Yeah.
You right? So
I've joked, I'm like, anything past Beaver is north for
Okay.
me. They're like, what part? I'm
So
like,
I'm
well,
always curious.
Yeah,
So when I said that, I was like, I wonder what yours is.
Yeah.
So
I'm not too far from you. I'm like a couple towns away.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
and I said, well, you're applying for Weber or wherever it was. I'm like, you're applying for Weber? And like, I was more serious about a relationship than she was at the time. And she's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, what happens if you get in? And she's like, well, I go to Weber. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, and then she's starting to realize like what I'm getting at. And she's like, well, would you come up there? Like, would you follow me to school? I'm all, hell no.
Oh.
So I'm like, I'm staying in
I'm a
St. George.
lifer.
Yeah. I was like, and I had a lot of stuff going on at the time. But I was like, no, dude, I don't ever plan on leaving St. George. And luckily she got in at Dixie.
I was gonna say, what would have happened though? You really wouldn't have followed her?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it wasn't just my decision at the time. Like I was helping out my family and stuff going on with my parents and things like that. So I felt pretty.
You had roots to be here.
Yeah, like I had a lot of reasons to be here. But yeah, it's always just a joke we talk about because I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go anywhere but St. George.
Man, that's where the universe is like, okay, keep her in St. George.
Yeah, they're supposed to be
heard
together.
you. Yeah.
So I know you're not going to believe this. We're at 2 hours.
No, we're not. Oh my
I
gosh.
told you it flies.
Oh my gosh. I was waiting for you to look up where I'm like, what time is it?
So for people that don't know,
Yeah.
I have a clock above the guests so we can kind of keep time. But we were just going, so I
Yeah.
just let it go. Let's go through a little bit of tourism that you do, though. Let's
Okay.
touch on that.
Yeah,
Since
let's hit on
the
that a
reason she
little
came
bit.
in was that, but I told her, I'm like, we'll get in talking more about you, and then that's where we're gonna go.
That's
so,
perfect.
and that's the point. That's the reason we do this. So, just give me your rundown. I'll just kind of turn the mic over to you if you're okay with that, and just talk about what you're doing for work, the revenue it brings into Southern Utah, or Utah, because
Yeah.
you're all of Utah.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple questions, but I'll kind of just let you take over.
Well, full disclosure too, since it's only since November,
Sure.
I'm still learning so much. So I'm sure if anybody's watching this that they're like, she's not so sure. I'm like, no, I'm still learning it. But Utah.com, it's a revenue-owned website. There's Visit Utah, which is through the state. We're owned by Deseret Digital Media. So it's the website for people to come and places to learn where to go and for playing and staying, lodging. It's all things planning your trip to Utah. It's not a booking agency though, so we have all the clients and then we just push the leads over to their website or to their phones or emails. But it's such an awesome setup. Like going from healthcare into this, like there's some similarity just because with tourism, it is such a big revenue for the state that they have its own budget set up to help promote and push for the state to even grow the revenue additionally, because that's what pays for so much of your city structure as well as through the tax revenue of tourism.
Yep.
But yeah, so we work on I'm on the advertising side of that. So we're all things advertising and revenue for Utah.com. I have a team of 2. But we on the revenue side of that, like I couldn't say like what the top revenue of Utah is at this point. I know we've gone through every month. They have a tourism board that we'll go through and talk the trends and revenue of.
Are you talking like specific places or
Well,
reasons
so
for revenue?
So specific places, like there's Utah, like how much tourism brings in for Utah in total. And so they go over that, but then we talk through the trends of like what's happening, because it's really amazing. The state's put a ton of education and tracking into where the revenue comes from and what the trends are going to be, because it really helps the individual businesses as well. But what was interesting to me is like Washington County is the highest tax revenue for Utah for tourism, which was amazing. Like being from St. George, I'm like, yeah, it's a attractive place to be, absolutely. But when you think of like Moab, Salt Lake, it was amazing to see like how high Washington County is for that. But like we just barely had Ironman, the World Championship, which brought in $42 million.
Is that
revenue.
what it was?
Yes.
Good
Like
night.
maybe it was like 42.7 even.
Doesn't St. George pay to have that here, or don't they have some type of expense with that?
So I'm not sure what the expense was, but they also have with Ironman, like that's their own event, so they cover, I'm sure, a ton of that expense as well. But it was like I probably do need to talk to our partners.
I was just
to see on the
curious.
expense. Yeah, but it was such a drawn out thing. So that's what's amazing in the learning how tourism works, like between events and also destinations. Like Zion is the third most visited national park in the country, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Something that I thought, like, it's fun, like learning, being from Utah and especially this area, like you just take so much for granted, right?
Yeah.
Or like it's just your backyard. Like Sand Hollow was the most visited state park in Utah.
Really?
Which was crazy, but then you think about how bananas the whole sand dunes area is over there.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But
That
of like
still
the
surprises
most
me.
visited, yeah, it's crazy. But it's been fascinating to learn on, because like we just hear about, the crowd, like even myself included before this, like the crowds or how it's like how it displaces like your just normal life. That's probably where my mind would first go to, or like, where do I want to travel and go to? But hearing it from the strategic side now of like learning how the state promotes Utah or how they have and like what their initiatives are to help with some of their pain points. Like they want to be able to spread, they did the Mighty Five, which pushed to those national parks into the southern regions of Utah. And so now the look is like in the Red Emerald strategic plan, like how do we push to like these hidden gems throughout Utah, and how do we help people to stay 3 to 4 days in these areas instead of being like the Instagram, take the shot onto the next spot.
Yeah.
Like have a more meaningful, like sustainable, responsible trip. That's kind of been on the tourism end, like what's been really cool to sit in on these like meetings and hear how they track all that, and even how gas prices are affecting bookings. Like you would think that there's so much with COVID that really once fall came into play in 2020, like we had a boom in so many ways. And even a lot of our partners that we work with on Utah.com, that 2021 was one of their best years ever. That wasn't the same for everyone, but it's been fascinating to see how things have shifted. So like international travel still isn't fully back. Gas prices are really affecting a lot of things currently, and like cancellations are up by 30% just because of how the economy shift. But what is fascinating now, like it used to be like a 6-week, like the partners that I've talked to and hearing how their trends, like that's what's been so fun for me as a novice coming in. Like, is novice the right word? Yeah. A new person coming in. For me, I want to understand who their competitors are. Like, what are your trends? Like, what does this industry feel and look like? And each year it's just shifted so much. Like currently right now we were at, we were in some small town. Now I'm trying to think where the town was. We were in Utah, but the hotel that we were staying at said their walk-ins are their number one source of business right now, which is just crazy. Like we can't plan for anything because we don't know, but that's where the main bookings are, is just walk-ins, which is amazing. It's such a change to it.
I wouldn't even think to just walk into a hotel.
Yeah, I'm like that kind of seems to be my way of travel. I'm like, we'll figure it out as we go. But definitely that's a hardship for like the tourism at this point, is like staffing's difficult, and being able to anticipate and plan. Like it's still such a shift for so many people. But tourism for Utah, like it's super impressive. Like the way that like the state does grants and funding for any destination place and nonprofit to help promote into these areas, just because they see it as the more that they can pull from people outside of Utah coming to visit, there's your tax revenue coming from that. So it really helps, like on a whole, how much it brings to each of your destinations. Like it is amazing to learn like how much it can really just help your economy. And that's been a new thing for me coming in. Like my passion and love on the side has been travel, like, and so it's been really fun. Utah's a huge state, and so it's been fun. I get to travel all over Utah now and finding these small little towns and finding out what they're about. I'm like, that's so funny. I've been from here, and I had no clue about 3/4 of the state beyond just the basics. So,
what's your favorite place that you've been to that you're unaware of, or maybe that you didn't know as much about?
You know what? On the most local place, like I have never really experienced much of Bryce.
Okay.
This is so funny. Like I hardly ever went to Bryce, and that has been like such a cool local place.
Bryce is cool.
I love it. It was amazing. Bear Lake up in the northern part of Utah, and even like Logan in the summertime, Cache Valley, like we just recently went up there, and I'm like, okay, this is beautiful. Because I only knew it in the wintertime. I never even went to Utah State because I was like, I don't want to freeze.
Yeah.
But I would say that's my most recent favorite
cool.
place. But yeah, tourism for Utah, it is a booming industry for sure. It's cool to see like how, and on the marketing end, like they're incredibly smart people. Like because they have to, I guess it's for any business, you have to like shift as things change, but it's fascinating to see like how they track and trend stuff and market around it to promote our home state.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun to be a part of it too. Like Utah.com, it's a unique, I joke that it's like the sweet pro voice of Utah. Like we have a different like voice on the website and like how we talk and visit with like and help people plan for their trip. It's been really fun to be a part of.
See, and you were wondering how you're going to fill an hour talking about.
I know. Here we are 2 hours later. You have so much editing to do.
And we got 5 minutes of tourism in.
You did. Oh my gosh. You're like, wrap it up.
No.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. Like I said, we try to be like hour and a half, but I feel like if we're flowing, like I'm not going to shut that down. And
Perfect. We flowed.
But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. It's nice to meet you.
You too, Derick.
I know that I think Mallory's had it lined up for a little bit. She's been telling me about you. So it's cool to have someone on that I don't know and I can meet them and we just get to know each other right here.
Yeah. Getting the text of like, hey, do you want to be on this podcast? I was like, oh my gosh, like, thank you. It was
And then you're like, it's just some kid with a beard and a hat on backwards.
This is the most incredible setup. I love it so much. For me, like, I've always been curious about podcasts. Like when you've talked about other people and when they go and look at this, like, I think this is the most amazing setup. So thank you for the opportunity. When she reached out to me, I'm like, I don't think I'm interesting in any way, but like, I would absolutely love to experience this.
Yeah. And then you filled 2 hours because that's how
Yeah.
interesting you are. That's a common thing.
That's how much of a talker I am.
Well, I would say anyone that ever has an opportunity to be on a podcast, regardless of what it is, should do it.
Oh,
just the
definitely.
experience of it's cool.
Yeah.
But especially when you can get in with someone and just have a good conversation, like you just never know when it's going to go. And I
Yeah,
think that
you're a
we
good
touched a lot of good
conversationalist.
things that I liked. So, so yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Episode 52 is in the
books. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, guys, if you enjoyed that, what's your their social media? People can follow you on social media, anything like that? Because we'll tag you and stuff anyway.
I would say more go to utah.com and check it out.
Okay.
But
Well, that's fine
my
too.
social media, it's Jennifer Shakespeare
Okay.
on Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. So she'll do clips. If you've seen our clips,
Yeah,
she'll
they're
cut
awesome.
little clips out, but she'll tag you in them too. So you'll be on there.
Cool.
So you'll see like the Derick Lake podcast tagged you in this, whatever.
So I'm going to become an internet sensation.
You're
is
pretty
what
much
saying.
going to be famous.
Yes.
Yeah. I hope you're
Okay.
ready for that.
I've got to go clean up a couple photos then.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's going to be combing your stuff now.
Yeah, make sure it's all PC.
All right. Thanks, guys. If you enjoyed this, which I know you did, 5-star us, rate us, share us, and reach out. I mean, if you've thought about being on the podcast, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you think that we're just not very good at this, I'd love to hear about it. So throw it out here. You can message the Derick Lake podcast, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can message me, just Derick Legg, DerickLegg, Blue Form Media. There's lots of different ways to get a hold of us. So we're going to bring back Tyler Campbell from our first guest ever on the podcast next week. So I'm looking forward to having Tyler on, and we'll see you guys next week.